Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolon Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
On February 9th of 2004, 21-year-old UMass Amherst student Maura Murray disappeared in the White Mountains of New Hampshire in one of the most perplexing mysteries of our time.
For years, we have covered Maura's case and the tireless online community that surrounds it in great detail. We have since expanded our mission with this series, raising awareness and shining a light on the stories of other missing persons.
We now sit on the board of directors of the nonprofit organization Private Investigations for the Missing, which was founded by Bruce Maitland. Bruce's daughter, Brianna Maitland, went missing from Montgomery, Vermont on March 19th of 2004. This is Missing.
After all these years, once the podcast started coming out, we started getting tips. One of her husband Richard's family members came forward, specifically asked us to search this spot. It's a 31-foot vertical shaft, and then it went over, and then it went through a crevice, and then there's another room.
How close was this area to where Erica went missing?
Probably 2 miles.
There were sightings of keys within a mile of a diner that she worked at a few weeks before she went missing, asking people how deep Lake Champlain was in certain points, and asking people if anyone would know they disappeared. Just common small talk you make with strangers.
Wow, so that was the other job that Brianna Maitland had.
She was driving really crazy on the way home. She was tailgating, driving fast. She seemed to be irritated about something all of a sudden. Everything was fine, but all of a sudden, and I think it had to do with that phone call.
I was in the dentist chair and the local radio station came on. And that's how I found out. It was Archer Ray Johnson is missing. And I was, okay, that's not a name that you hear. You're in a small town. I knew it was my dad.
But I think sometimes we all need to be reminded that for every day that you don't do something, that you don't act, or you aren't on the offensive, that someone is in great anguish.
Follow us on social media at Missing CSM. Search for Missing in your favorite podcatcher.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we conclude our investigation into the mysterious disappearance of Asha Degree. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Barrett, and I'm joined, as always, with my insightful co-host, Alice.
Thank you, Brett. I tried to see things. Funny story.
You're
I had
full of insights, Alice.
Thank you. But funny story because I actually have terrible eyesight. So, Maybe the unlikely insightful one, where
It's
sight is
more- It's more
elusive.
your mental abilities than your abilities to actually see. I think that I'm looking for here, but whatever, Alice. Everybody knows you're perfect in every way.
Oh, I'm certainly not, but thanks for pretending. It's so good to be back with you. I really do. No matter what happens during the workday, which is typically, crazy, it's always good to sit down and talk about mysteries and really sad cases with you.
I know, you would think that all these horrible, terrible things we talk about wouldn't be so enjoyable to discuss, but they are. They're really sort of the highlight of my day, always. I don't know what that says about me.
I guess same with our listeners. Thanks for
That's a good point.
de-stressing with us, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. And we're back today to talk about the case of Asha Degree, a truly mysterious case, just really insane. I think those of you who didn't know this story before we started down this path, you probably have already seen why this story is so bizarre and so unusual, but we're going to keep going with it. And I think the more we talk about it, the stranger it will get. And we'll just hope that maybe somebody out there knows something. And this is one of those where one of you guys holds the key to figuring this out. So we finished up the timeline yesterday or last week. And the thing about that timeline is it runs right up until the end of 2020. This is a case that's active. It's a case that maybe you could even see being solved one day. And I hope people will continue to focus on this case. But now that we've talked about the timeline and you know what happened and you know how everything went down, let's get into some of the strange aspects of this case that you're probably already asking yourself about and things that you've already probably started thinking about. And the first one is what Asha packed, and she did pack. It seems pretty clear, and the FBI is pretty sure that this is something Asha had planned. This was not something where at the last minute that night she was upset for some reason and decided to run away. I mean, she may have decided to run away, but it was a decision that she had made, the FBI believes, a few days beforehand. And as part of that, she had packed her backpack. We know that her black book bag, her black and tan book bag that would eventually be found, was missing, along with a black Tweety Bird purse that she had. Also a pair of blue jeans with a red stripe, black sneakers, a long-sleeved white shirt with purple lettering, a red vest with black trim, black overalls with Tweety Bird on them, and a long-sleeved black and white shirt. It's believed, based on sightings, that Asha was wearing a white shirt, white jeans, and white tennis shoes. Some people who tell this story embellish a little bit and say that she fled in her nightgown, but that seems not to be true. What actually seems as though it happened was when her brother, O'Brien, is hearing her get up, one thing she's doing is she's changing clothes. She's changing into this white shirt, these jeans, and the tennis shoes, grabbing her backpack that's already been packed, and heading out.
Brett, one thing that really strikes me here is that she, we know that she slept over at her cousin's house the night before. So my first thought was, is it possible that she didn't pack and this was just left over from her sleepover? And I think that's unlikely because if you look at the clothing items that she packs, she has definitely more than one outfit. She has about 2 outfits, so for multiple days. She has blue jeans and overalls, so you can't wear them at the same time. She has 2 shirts, and that just leads me to believe that this was not for the sleepover because I understand that her cousin lives close by. They're very close and their families are close, but here we have packing for more than one day. It's not just to go for the day, it's to go maybe for several days.
And one thing that we mentioned before, but I didn't mention then, is she didn't pack any food. She packed some candy, or she had some of the candy that she had been given for Valentine's Day as part of her basketball team, but she didn't pack a bunch of food. So, trying to imagine what she's thinking and what she's doing, if you think that she thought she was going to go off and sort of, live in the woods and be raised by wolves or something, she didn't take food with her. And you would think, she would know to take food, even if it was the kind of things a kid might pack. So like donuts or, crackers, or I don't actually know what kids would pack, but there's none of that. There's some candy, and then there's these clothes.
Right. I think that's very, the fact that she's leaving for that long but not taking food may suggest that she planned to leave for more than a couple of days, but she didn't plan to be without shelter or food.
Right. I think that's the way I read this. I read it as she was going somewhere where people would be, and it would be people who would have, they're not going to have clothes for her. She needs to bring her own clothes, but they're going to have things like food. And just looking, and once again, I mean, this is a 9.5-year-old girl here, so you're trying to think like a 9-year-old, which isn't easy. Maybe my little girl is way too young. Maybe some of you who have 9, 10-year-olds would love to hear your insights on this and what you think was sort of going through her head based on your own experience with your children, just because it's difficult to figure it out. But I think a 9.5-year-old, while still a child and still thinking like a child, is rational enough that she could make sort of this decision. I'm going to pack some clothes I'm going to need. I'm going to need a change of clothes. But if she were going somewhere where she would need food, I think she would have packed some food.
I mean, just an anecdote, and it's very different from a 9.5-year-old, but my 3.5-year-old, every time we leave the house, this is true, he asks me, Mom, did you pack snacks? Every single time we leave. And I'm talking, we're going for a walk to like down the street. And he's like, Mom, did you pack snacks? It's like the most important thing to him. Now, it might just be because he's 3, he's a boy. I don't know. But even at 3.5, that's his he would be more likely to grab a snack than he would be to grab a jacket, for sure. And one other thing is that she changes. So this is, I don't think, a situation where it was emotional, that for whatever reason she was angry or sad, or necessarily even sleepwalking, because she gets up and changes into a coordinated outfit. White shirt, white jeans, white shoes, they all match. That's a nice outfit, right? It's she had some forethought into what she would put on, and she probably had to lay it out because she probably did not want to wake up her brother. It was probably laid out for her to have easy access to so she could pull it on in the dark. And so that leads me to believe that she thought about what she was going to wear. She wanted to look nice as well, and she didn't think about the weather, or that she wanted to look nice no matter what. The weather didn't factor into her dressing, because wearing all white on a rainy, muddy night, I mean, you would expect it to get dirty very quickly. The next unusual aspect is the locked doors. All of the doors to the house were found locked. Asha kept her house key in the book bag, and because of her parents' jobs, Asha and her brother regularly let themselves into the house, say after school, and so she had a key to her house. So if she left from a door, she could lock it back up. Now, we don't know if she left from a door. I think that's very likely because she is pretty small. It would be quite a drop if she climbed from a window, but she thought to lock the door. And now she does sound like a responsible kid, a responsible 9-year-old. Her parents trusted her and her brother to let themselves in after school, and she knew that locking the door was something important. So she sounds like a girl who has sense and who understands kind of the basics of safety and security. So again, this is not just some kid who wandered out of their house. She knew to lock the doors behind her.
Yeah, I think this is important for a couple reasons, and I think you've put your finger on it. Number one, and you mentioned sleepwalking earlier when you talked about what Asha had packed, and sleepwalking is a theory that some people have. I think it's completely debunked by the evidence. This seems like a very intentional thing that she did, not something that was done while she was sleepwalking. The fact that she locked the doors, number one, I think if you were sleepwalking, I think it would be unlikely that you would lock the doors. And we don't know of any history she had of sleepwalking, so it's unlikely this would be her first sleepwalking event. But as you said, Asha, this is not, and I want to go back to something we talked about in the last episode. Asha is often presented as this sort of sheltered, coddled girl who maybe was actually kind of young for her age. She was 9, but maybe she was She was even less mature than that. And I think this goes to the fact that that's not true. She was mature enough to deal with the fact that her parents worked and she was going to have to let herself in after school, and her and her brother were going to have to take care of themselves. I mean, that requires a certain level of maturity, even if it's a level of maturity that comes about by necessity, because there was no other choice in their family than for her to do that. So I think she is a responsible person. I think she is somebody who is at least as mature as your average 9.5-year-old. And, once again, the fact that she thought to lock the door shows that maturity, and also shows that this was a very intentional act. Now, to me, and it's really hard for me to get past this, and that's the weather that night. Guys, it was cold. I mean, we're not just talking a brisk day. According to historical weather data, the morning of February 14th, it was between 43 and 47 degrees when Asha would have left home, 35 at the airport, so even 43 to 47 might be a little too high. And most importantly, it was raining that morning. It had been raining quite a bit and didn't stop raining until around 6 in the morning, and you had winds gusting up to 36 miles an hour that night. It was storming that night. It is a cold, wet, windy, scary night. This is not the kind, she didn't walk off into some quiet night. This wasn't, a night to strike off on an adventure. This was a really, really bad night. She just walked off into that storm. And it's one of the reasons I think some people do go to the sleepwalking theory, because they just can't imagine that she would willingly and consciously walk off into that storm. Now, I don't know how you could walk into that storm sleepwalking and not wake up, but it certainly seems as though Asha was so committed to what she was doing. It was something that she had planned for a few days. She had packed for it. This was the night she was going. Come hell or high water, this was the night. And the fact that it was storming didn't stop her.
Right, Brett. And what that says to me is that she wasn't leaving just to leave. It sounds more like she had an appointment. There was a day you have to be there, and that's why she left that day, even if it were raining. If she had decided to run away, you might just pick the next day to run away when it wasn't raining, when the weather was better, when she could walk without a storm happening. But you can't push it off if you're supposed to meet someone or if you have an appointment. And so that strikes me as important, that despite it being such bad weather, she decides to leave that night.
And it's interesting because this is not an ideal night to leave, really, under any circumstances. Not only is it storming, but because of the storm, you've had a power outage, which means that her father was awake for a good bit of time. You may recall her father had come home from work. He worked second shift. He had fallen asleep on the couch. Her mother had woken him up to collect the kerosene lantern when the power came back on. And he watched television until around, I think, 2:30 in the morning, and actually checked in on Asha and her brother to make sure they were okay. So even if Asha wanted to run away, the fact that her father was awake and home is just another reason that this was just not an ideal night to do it, if it didn't matter which night you were going. I think you're right. I think this seems like she had an appointment. She was supposed to be somewhere, and she was going to make that appointment.
Another unusual aspect is that Asha's 4th grade class at Falston Elementary School read the book The Whipping Boy by Sid Fleischman in February of 2000. So the month where she left home, they had just finished reading The Whipping Boy. Now, this book centers around the story of a prince and a commoner child who receives lashes on the royal's behalf. The children proceed to run away, and the book details their adventures. Both boys return safely to the kingdom at the end of the story. Now, all we know is that her class read this book the same month that she left her house. It's really not known if this book served as a catalyst for Asha's disappearance, but it's noteworthy when you have so few clues or facts or evidence to point to as to why a seemingly happy, rational girl would just leave her home. And here you have this story that she had just read at school about a boy who essentially went on an adventure, even though the circumstances that led him to run away were very tragic, were very sad. The story is more about the adventures than it is the circumstances of him leaving. And so, what do you think, Brett? I mean, she is 9.5. She's impressionable, but not, she's also old enough to know what's fact and what's fiction.
If this book had been found in her backpack, then I think you would have a stronger argument for this being the catalyst for her to run away. I mean, she did have a book in her backpack. We know that it was McElligott's Pool.
It honestly sounds like a fun, because Dr. Seuss books are like very long. It sounds like a book that you take along to pass the time at the doctor's office.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I have several of these books in my home. They're fun. They're long. I mean, this one's 64 pages. I have several of these books, and they seem to be really long for children's books. But I mean, just the plot off of Wikipedia is that it's a story about a boy named Marco who's fishing in like this trash-filled pond known as McElligott's Pool. And, someone laughs at him and says, "You're never going to catch anything in that trash-filled pond." And the main character is still hopeful, and he's like, "I'm going to catch a fish." So it's not about running away. It's about fishing.
It's very strange. I mean, there's nothing, I guess it's maybe not strange. It's just maybe a book she liked, if it's even her book. But there doesn't seem to be anything in McElligott's Pool that's gonna answer this question. And as far as this other book, they read a book in school. I mean, I understand she left, and she seems to have done it in a very intentional way. And you could imagine that she's going off on some adventure. That's how she sees it. But I think I'm going to go back to this idea that you've put your finger on, which I think is an important one, and I think we should dwell on. And that's that this day mattered. That it mattered that it was this day. And that doesn't really fit with the book, right? Because if she wanted to go off on an adventure, she could have waited and gone off on the adventure the next day or the night before. And I think this theory really appeals to people who see her as sort of an immature 9-year-old and as someone who's not as sophisticated because she's so sheltered. And I just don't think that fits with what we know. I don't think what we've discussed is a girl who's any more sheltered than your average 9-year-old. I'm not going to say she's wise beyond her years. I don't know that that's true, and I don't think there's any evidence of that. But I don't think there's evidence, and I don't think we've seen anything that makes you think that she's really immature. And I just don't think, and once again, I want those of you who have 9 and 10-year-olds to write in and let us know, this doesn't seem like the kind of thing a 9.5-year-old would do to me. Like this flight of fantasy, reading a book and believing you're going to go off on an adventure in the middle of the night, I find that hard to believe that she would do that. And so while I guess it's interesting that they were reading this book, I don't think this book's the catalyst. I don't think this is the answer to the mystery.
And if anything, I mean, of course, we don't know what the lesson plan was, but I remember when you would read books in elementary school, even middle school, the way you dissect it literarily. I mean, you dig into every aspect of a novel or a coming of age story that by the end of reading the book for school purposes, it's not like a fun book or a plot that I dwell on. I'm like, oh, there's a simile, there's a metaphor, I get it. I think back to all the books I read, maybe a little bit older than Asha, but like middle school, high school, and how I never enjoyed them because they were school assignments and we kind of just pounded in all the literary aspects of the book. And now, many years later, I think, wow, that was a classic. I'm so glad I read it, but I got nothing out of it that you should. I should reread it now just for pleasure. So, I'm pretty sure that her teacher did not dwell on the fact that if you run away, you can have all these magical adventures and no responsibilities and nothing bad can come of it. I'm sure if anything, the teacher would say, now this is probably a hyperbole, of dealing with your issues or whatnot.
Yeah, it almost seems like, an urban legend. I feel like there are urban legends about kids reading a book and thinking, they're going to see SpongeBob at the bottom of the ocean, and so they walk into the ocean and drown themselves or whatever. I think that actually is an urban legend, and that's what it feels like to me, not reality. I think you're right. Most of the stuff you're assigned in school, even if you do enjoy it, it's an assignment, and that automatically makes it less enjoyable. So yeah, I don't really think this is really. I don't think this is much of a clue, even though it's always brought up and it's always discussed every time Aisha's disappearance comes up. One thing you mentioned, and I'm going to keep coming back to it because I think it's important. You talked about how this is an appointment, and another unusual thing that we talked about a little bit when we talked about the timeline that made me think of is the fact that you have Aisha at some point. I think this also cuts against this being some sort of sleepwalking. At some point, there is someone who sees her, a trucker, who attempts to stop and help her, and Aisha runs away. So she actively avoids this person. I think it's possible that she just, even though she's doing this, there's still stranger danger. And so even if she's out in the middle of nowhere, I mean, imagine that she was sleepwalking and she sleepwalks for a mile, and then she wakes up and she's in the middle of nowhere and she sees a trucker. If it were me, I think I would run to someone. I would want help from basically anybody that I could get help from, but she doesn't do that. She runs away. And in fact, she runs into the woods, which once again, the weird thing about this case, Aisha is often described as sort of a shy, retiring girl, a girl who's afraid of dogs, a girl who's afraid of storms. And you have her in a storm. Not only is she in a storm, she's running into the woods at night, in the dark, in a storm. Just whatever it is propelling her to do this has to just be incredibly powerful. To the point that it's difficult for me to even imagine what could inspire a 9-year-old with that kind of ferocity. Certainly not the whipping boy. I don't think the whipping boy could inspire her to do that. And I kind of, I feel like we mentioned Maura Murray at some point in every case, but it kind of goes back to the Maura Murray thing. And if you could figure out why did she go, you could figure out the case. And I feel like it's the same thing here. Maybe that's not, a great revelation or anything, but I feel like if we could figure out why she was doing this, so many of our questions would have an answer.
Absolutely. Especially because everything she's done, the days leading up to her disappearance have been dissected, and really nothing jumps out about her that makes her leaving make sense. She's not an irresponsible girl. She's not an angry girl. She's not hyperactive. She's not, prone to run away from home. And so you have to reach outside the typical explanations.
And I think one clue that we may have to what she was doing, though even this doesn't make sense, is the photo of the other girl, the photo that was found in the shed where Aisha sought shelter. As we said before, this photo, this girl has never been identified. It was found along with some of her items in this shed, including some candy wrappers that came from the candy that she had received as part of her basketball team for Valentine's Day. And honestly, the photo bears an uncanny resemblance to Aisha. Personally, I think it's very clear that this is a school photo. No one knows how she got this photo, but I think, and as we get into theories, I think this is we're going to flesh this out some more. I think that this photo is really a key to explaining this case. I think it's part of what inspired her to do this, though. Once again, imagine that the story is she was going to meet this girl, and that's why she went off on this trip. Still doesn't really make sense. Why are you doing this in at 2:00 in the morning on a stormy day? I guess it's possible that whoever it was who sent her that photo was like, "Hey, I really want to meet you. Meet me at this time. Meet me at 4:00 in the morning on the highway on this day. That's the only time I can be there." I guess that's possible. And maybe a 9-year-old would fall for something like that. But I do think that photo, whatever the story is behind it, it has a lot to do with this case.
Yeah, Brett, and I don't know which way it cuts, right? If it's that she has a secret pen pal or who she thinks is a pen pal, why would she hide it from her friends and family or her brother? What about the first interaction would cause her to keep this secret, especially if she just looks like another girl who looks a lot like Asha? There's nothing to hide. It's just another girl. So I've tried to think outside the box and think, is it that she wants to be a hero and she somehow thinks that this girl is missing and there's been a cry for help of other girls who are like her, who can think like her, and she can go help solve the mystery of what happened to this girl? I mean, that's based off of nothing. I'm just trying to think, why would no one in her life know about this girl?
No, I think it's worthwhile to think through that stuff. I mean, what would be the reason? There is no good reason to hide her existence. Now, the one thing I'll say, and I've said this several times, this is a case that doesn't have a lot of information. It hasn't been as covered. It's been covered a lot lately, but for the most part, it's been rehashing sort of the same things we know. A lot of this information comes from an interview that was given by her parents, but we don't have a lot of primary sources here. So maybe in addition to not, really being able to spend much time on the computer and limited what she could watch on television, maybe her parents didn't want her talking to kids who didn't go to school with her. I guess that's a possibility. And so, whoever did this or whoever was involved with this could have used that to their advantage and said, "Hey, I know you're not supposed to be talking to people, but you're really cool, and I want to get to know you. Here's a photo, right? Let's keep this a secret between us, and that way we can be friends. It can be secret friends." I mean, who knows, right? I mean, it is all speculation. I think you make a really good point, though. It's difficult for me to come up with a reason why you would need to keep that a secret. A lot of times when people are grooming kids, it's because they convince them that, they're in love with them. And so don't tell your parents, they won't let us be together or whatever, that kind of thing. That obviously isn't happening here. So that's a great question. And it's not one that I have a very good answer to.
And, if it is one of those instances where someone approaches her and says, how would she first get in contact? That just boggles my mind. Usually your parents are around, you're at school. Would it be another kid who gave her the photo and said, like, this person really wants to be your friend? But, as far as we know, as if they're telling the truth, none of the kids at the school know who this girl is. So, seemingly none of them are complicit in that sort of a scheme. So where would she even be in contact with someone who would hand this picture to her? Because here's the thing. I don't think this girl is real in the sense that it's really a photo of someone, but I don't think that girl is who was communicating with her if in fact she was communicating with someone.
And I would love to know. I am sure the FBI conducted an investigation and discussed. I know the FBI conducted an investigation, and I'm sure they discussed with her classmates. I'm sure they interviewed the kids. Always a delicate process, but it would be really interesting to know what they did say, whether they had any insight into this or not. The FBI, as they often are, has been pretty close hold on this case. We've talked about some of the information they've released. One thing the FBI has said, and they seem pretty sure of, is that she had planned this for a while, and she knew she was doing it, and she was ready to do it that night. Whether that's based on something they learned from talking to some of the kids or just the facts of the case, I don't know. And unless they release more information, We may not know that.
So, Brett, these are the few facts that we have. So now let's move on to theories. What happened?
Your guess is as good as mine, but I guess we'll go through them.
I guess we will. I mean, I laugh because, man, this is mind-boggling. It's maddening how I really have no idea. You know, I've thought about it before we did all our research. I've thought about it throughout our recording sessions, and still, you know, right before we started recording, you said, "Do you have a theory of what happened?" And as we've been talking, it's changed. But let's go through some of the common theories. The parents. In a case like this, you have to consider that the parents may have been involved. You know, it's hard to imagine why a girl this age, 9, would run away like she did unless she was running away from something, like an abusive home, either physically or sexually. We say that not because specifically about Asha, but that's just a common scenario you see. Typically, kids don't just leave their homes in the middle of the night unless there's something compelling them to leave. But her parents were eliminated as suspects really early on in the process, and you can betcha that the law enforcement are going to hone in on her parents as the first suspects to eliminate. And they were. Asha's father actually asked to take a polygraph, and as soon as this all happened, he didn't delay. He asked to take the polygraph, and he passed. You know, we've talked about how trustworthy polygraphs are, but for those of you who put stock in that, you know, he did not hesitate. In fact, he was the one to bring it up and say, "I want to take a polygraph." And it didn't show any indication of stress or any abnormalities that would indicate he was trying to hide something. Now, maybe he had been planning, you know, to pass a polygraph test. And we've talked about this in the past. You can study and prepare yourself to pass a polygraph test in a number of ways. Despite the unusual circumstances, the police have never considered the family a suspect. Now, Brett, this in and of itself is worthy of conversation, that the family is not considered a suspect.
Yeah, because obviously they're the first suspects, right? Little girl disappears into the night. She's 9 years old. It's storming. The first people you're going to consider are the parents. No question. And I'm sure there were a lot of people who did consider them. And when I first heard the story, when I first heard the facts that she had disappeared, the first thought I had was, well, the parents did it. You know, like the dad did it and then covered it up. She didn't walk. She never left that house. That was the first thing I thought. She never left that house. She didn't leave the house. She was killed. They said she ran away. They got rid of the body, and that's what happened. But she did leave the house. We know that for a fact because she was cited by 2 different people that night, and those sightings are solid. I don't think there's any question about them. I don't think anybody questions that those sightings were of Asha. So this is not a Casey Anthony case where Casey Anthony tells the police that her daughter was kidnapped. I think she said the maid took her, and then it turns out in reality, you know, Casey Anthony either through negligence or deliberate act killed her child and dumped her in the woods. That's not what happened here. She left the house that day. The things we can say for sure, she definitely packed and got ready to go. She left. She went off into the rain and the storm, and whatever happened after that happened. Now, that doesn't mean that the catalyst for her leaving wasn't her parents. Certainly the case that her parents had passed a polygraph. You would think if there was something going on in that household, even if O'Brien at the time, he's a child, he's 10 years old, maybe he's not going to tell the police about that. Maybe he's sort of cowed into silence by his parents. You would think by now he would have spoken out about it because it's impossible for this to have happened without him knowing about it. They shared a room. We know she left. He would have known if she was being abused. There's just no question. Now, look, that doesn't mean there's not some weird stuff that happened that night. And if you listen to Cold Case Murder Mysteries, the podcast I often mention and rarely agree with, he, in his Asha Degree episode, really sort of lays this out, sort of the case against the parents. And he does point to some things that, frankly, seem a little unusual. So you've got Harold, who he works second shift, so that's usually 3 to 11. He gets home at 11, and the story he tells is that at some point he decides to leave his house to go get candy for Valentine's Day. So Valentine's Day is the next day, and so he's going to go and get candy. This really doesn't make any sense, right? So basically, he gets home at 11 or a little bit after 11, and then at 11:30, he leaves the house to go get Valentine's Day candy. I don't know. I know it's February 13th. I know Valentine's Day is the next day. Personally, I would not drive out into a storm when the power's off in my house to buy Valentine's Day candy. I don't even know where you would go.
Yeah, but that I didn't say anything when we went through the timeline, and I think I said, he left at 11:30 to get candy, and I thought, okay, that's weird.
Yeah, it's weird.
What's open? A pharmacy? No, I think I'm thinking about like CVS or Walgreens. They might be 24-hour, but you're not going to have a very good candy selection. You're not going to get like, if in fact you're getting candy for their wedding anniversary, you think you'd want to get something nicer than you could get at, say, a drugstore, right? So it just seems like like you needed candy that bad. It's not like it's Halloween. You have to have candy. People are coming over to trick or treat, and still you'd have all day the next day. So it does seem like a strange time to go get candy.
And so the theory, by the way, just if you buy into this, that the parents were involved, the theory is essentially that Asha left much earlier than we're told. So she didn't leave at 2:30 in the morning. She left at like 10, right? So shortly after she's put to bed, she leaves. And her parents realize that and basically spend the rest of the night looking for her until they have to report her missing the next day. And so when Harold leaves to get Valentine's Day candy, he's actually going out to try and find her. That's what he's actually doing. That's sort of one of the theories, and that's just the excuse he came up with in case somebody saw him driving around. He would have a reason. It's kind of like Scott Peterson. Why did he tell the police that he went to the marina to go fishing when he was really dumping Lacey's body in San Francisco Bay? It's because he knew people saw him. They saw him out there, and so he needed a story to fit that, and that's sort of the theory here. Harold's out looking for her. She's run away because she's being abused. Harold's very angry. He goes out to look for her, and in case anybody saw him, I was out buying Valentine's Day candy, is what he says. Now, I don't know if he actually got Valentine's Day candy. I don't know if, he could just point to a bag of Valentine's Day candy and say, yeah, there's the bag. There's a receipt in the bag. It'll have the time. Maybe it does. Once again, we just don't know that. You would think that would be the kind of thing that the police would run down. But in any event, it's part of the theory. The second thing that people point to as unusual that's a part of this story. So he comes back around, whenever he gets back, and he falls asleep on the couch.
Is Valentine's Day supposed to be a school day, right? Because it'll be Monday. So one thing I could think in defense of him is that he went out not to buy Valentine's candy specifically, but Valentine's, like for the kids to bring to school. That might warrant leaving at night because you need it first thing in the morning to take to school. But in that case, it's usually not just candy. There's like the Valentine's that you have to sign and, make out to each of your friends and then put the little candy in the card. And I have not heard that he went out to buy Valentine's. I heard he went to buy candy.
So that's a really good thought, that he went out to get Valentine's for the kids. I will say, and I'm not entirely sure where this information comes to, but there's a really good podcast called Riddle Me That did an episode on Asha Degree. And in that episode, the host actually talks about the fact that Valentine's Day wasn't a big deal for the kids and that the kids weren't exchanging any kind of cards that year. So, like I said, I don't know exactly where they got that information, but if that's true, then it would seem like it probably wasn't for that purpose, that it actually was just to get candy, which once again, I don't know. I mean, I'm fine with picking up Valentine's Day candy. That's fine. But it's storming. The power's out. It's 11:30 at night. You just got home from work. I just don't know that many people who in that circumstance would be like, oh, shoot, I should have got some candy hearts when we go back.
Especially when like they'll be there tomorrow and it's still Valentine's Day tomorrow.
Yeah. And this is a rural area. It's not like, they live in the middle of the city and the drugstore's just at the end of the block. I mean, he's going to have to get in his car and go somewhere to do this. So in any event, He supposedly, at 11:30, he goes out to buy Valentine's Day candy. He buys the candy. He comes back and then essentially must immediately fall asleep on the couch because at 12:30, Aquila wakes him up. And she does that to put up this kerosene lamp because the power has come back on. At this point, he puts up the lamp, and then he checks on the kids to see if they're okay. Which, I mean, the power's just come back on. You could sort of imagine him doing that, and then he watches television for a couple hours. And then at around 2:30, he decides to go to bed, and he checks on the kids again, and he sees Asha asleep in her bed. A lot of people find this to be unusual. They find him checking on the kids twice within a 2-hour period to be an unusual thing to do.
I mean, I don't check on my kids once they go to sleep because I don't want to accidentally wake them up.
Yeah, and even if you did it once, would you do it twice?
No. I mean, I have no reason to believe that they'd be leaving their room. If, once I know they're at home, they're there.
Yeah, what changed in those 2 hours? And it makes you wonder if, you never know exactly what's going on in these situations. And it could be that he's just a very, conscientious guy, and he was going to bed, and maybe the last thing he does every night before he goes to bed is look in on his kids. So the fact that he'd looked in on them earlier really didn't matter. He was going to do it again, and then he was going to go to bed. It is certainly convenient that he does this because it puts her in bed and sets the timeline, and we know exactly where she was at 2:30. It does fit with the sightings of her. It certainly works out that if she was in bed at 2:30 and then left, she would be essentially where she was when she's sighted by these various people. So maybe we're thinking too much into this, but to me it does seem like a strange thing. Now, one possibility is that Asha was in some sort of rebellious state at this time. I mean, she's 9, so how rebellious can she be? This is actually one of the issues here. The people at NCMEC and who deal with kids running away have said repeatedly that this may be, if Asha decided to run away, it's almost a sui generis event. That kids this age don't do this. That kids they need to be older. Like 9-year-olds just don't run away like this. And there are no other examples of this. So, but maybe she was in some sort of weird rebellious phase, and maybe she had been doing things like sneaking away, and her parents had caught her doing that, and that's why he checked on her. That's a possibility.
But that would be really relevant facts that you would think would have come out, right? They would say, when they call the police, I can't find my daughter, but I think she's around here because she's been doing this. She's had this, she's kind of been sneaking out. That's a very strange thing to do for a 9-year-old, but you would think that would be the first thing out of their mouths. This has happened before. We found her at her cousin's house at whatever, but we have no indication that she's ever done this before. And, I actually just kind of did my own little survey that does not live up to any sort of, survey snuff, and it's clearly very biased. But I asked a bunch of people, just everyone I passed the past few weeks, when you were little, did you ever run away from home? There's something romantic about it. I loved the Boxcar Children's series, which is about, these orphans who end up running away rather than live with someone who they thought was a mean man, and they live in a boxcar. And it's about their adventures, and that's what the book's about. So it's about the adventures and the romanticism of basically running away and forging a life of your own and being self-sufficient even though you're kids. And I asked friends, did you ever run away as a kid? And most people said no, or I thought about it, or I threatened it when I was really angry with my parents when I was little. But most people said no. The people who said, yeah, I remember, taking the steps to run away, and I asked, how old were you? And almost always they were very young. They were like, I was like 5 or 6, and I would walk just a couple houses down from my house, and then I would feel incredible remorse and run back home. And no one, I was gone for a minute, 2 minutes, what have you. And then there would be no instances. No one really said that there were any instances of them wanting to leave home until kind of the high school years when you're rebellious and sneaking out all the time.
And that's entirely consistent with what the experts say is exactly that it's kids who are sort of really young and it's not a real attempt to run away and they're like 5 or 6 and it's sort of a fantasy driven thing and they don't get very far and then they come home or they're found or whatever. And then when they get a little bit older, they don't do that because they have sort of a better understanding of the world, but not to the point where they have sort of the gumption to actually run away, and it doesn't happen again until they get 12, 13, 14, 15.
So yeah, she falls right into, obviously there's always exceptions, but she really falls into the category where you don't see this happening, that she's not running away.
Right. And the last thing I'll say on this parent thing that some people point to, when the backpack was found, it was wrapped in a trash bag, and buried. And there are people who say that that's the kind of thing someone who knows and cares about the victim would do because it's an attempt to preserve that piece of her. And usually when you see stuff like that, it is someone like the parents. If you find the body of a child that's wrapped lovingly in a blanket, the parents did it, and so there are some people who say that that's an example of that, and that should lead you to have some suspicion that maybe the parents were involved.
I'm not convinced that the plastic bag, the trash bags for the backpack necessarily fit into wrapping your child lovingly in a blanket after you've murdered them. The trash bag actually really confuses me. There are a lot of ways to just throw a backpack away or burn it or dispose of it in a way that would never risk detection. You might think people see a trash bag and they'll never open it, but it's still there and it's preserved for you to find with things in it, right? It makes more sense to empty it if you're going to not get rid of the backpack. So the whole trash bag with the backpack thing actually really confuses me.
Yeah, the trash bag thing is weird. There's some people who think it was meant to be found, that maybe it was even buried. When they realized that this construction was going to happen, they buried it so that it would be found. Problem with that is, if the guy had just been like trash and thrown it away, it wouldn't have been found. So I don't know that I buy that. I don't understand why you bury the backpack separately from Asha. I mean, presumably the theory would be you bury the body, you bury the trash bag, and that's just how you decided to get rid of the evidence. You're going to bury it all. I don't know why you wouldn't bury it all together. I don't know why you would dig 2 separate holes to throw the stuff in. But more importantly, I don't know why you would do that. Like you said, just, drive to Raleigh and throw it in a dumpster and it'll never be seen again, It's a very strange, that's one of those facts in this case that is very strange and it's hard to put your finger on. Some people think it points to the parents. I tend to agree with you. I don't really think it does, and I got to say I don't think the parents were involved in this. I think, is it possible that everything wasn't perfect in the Degree home? Certainly possible.
I think the fact that, we said in the timeline that they really were a social family. They were around family. They spent a significant amount of time with family in the sense that their kids slept over. So, it's hard to hide things when you're spending so much time together with family members. They were at church. They have basketball teams. They stay and watch basketball games. This is not a reclusive family. They are very much in connection with family and community. And for no detection of any sort of abuse when they are that in touch with their community, I think would be very difficult. So I tend to agree with you that I don't think the family's involved here.
Right. And even if the rest of the community might be in a position to turn a blind eye to abuse, which certainly happens, you would think once Asha went missing, people would start talking. Even if they weren't talking before, even if it was kind of, that's their business, stay away from that. Once she went missing, you would think people would talk. And I've never seen anything. I've never seen any indication that her family was anything other than a loving family, love these kids, were doing everything they could to take care of these kids. Like I said, O'Brien would know. He would know. There's no way this was happening. He was 10 years old, 10 and a half years old. He was a little bit more than a year older than her. There's just no way that he would not know what was going on. And even if he kept it a secret at the time, I think he would have said something by now. And that hasn't happened. So in my view, I don't think the parents are involved. These, things that may seem unusual probably aren't. And I think we can put that aside. So a couple other theories. We've already talked about sleepwalking. I don't think sleepwalking holds water. I know some of you guys are going to write in and tell us all your crazy sleepwalking stories about how you sleptwalk for miles down the road in a storm. I'm sure it happens. There's no evidence that Asha suffered from that. Once again, the FBI thinks this was a planned thing, planned several days in advance. She locked the door behind her. She reacted to people. She ran into the woods when someone saw her. She took shelter in this shack. It just, nothing about this feels like sleepwalking. So while it's an interesting theory and it's a creative theory, and while it answers a lot of the questions, like why in the world would she do this when she wasn't really thinking, it was all unconscious, I don't think it actually stands up to much scrutiny. There are, however, some people in the area who do bear scrutiny. My grandfather, before he passed away, would have described the Johnson brothers as not worth killing. I think my mom would describe them the same way. I'll tell you a little bit about them. In September 2003, Danny Ray Johnson abducted an 11-year-old girl from a tractor pull held in Bellwood, which is about 20 minutes from Shelby, where Asha was from, raped her and left her tied to a tree naked in the woods. To make matters even better, his brother, Herbert, is also a convicted rapist, was apparently somehow working security at the tractor pull that day and probably had something to do with it. Both men are considered, or have been considered, suspects. They've both been interviewed by the police. At this time, there's not enough evidence to tie them to this case. But I think this, and we're going to talk about somebody else here in a second, this just serves to remind you how many awful, terrible people are living around you at any particular time. And certainly, I'm sure Shelby, North Carolina is a wonderful place, but there were bad people around. And you talk about what happened to Asha, there are a couple possibilities. One is, that she was groomed, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But the other is that this was a crime of opportunity. And you might be asking yourself, were, Danny Ray and Herbert really awake at 4:30 in the morning? Maybe they were. What are the chances they would come upon Asha? Will recall one thing that happened in this case is the second sighting, the trucker did a nice thing. He called out on the CB radio that there was a woman by herself walking down the road and that people should avoid her. Well, if the wrong person was listening to that, that's also there is a vulnerable woman walking down the road by herself with no one to protect her. So you have to wonder if maybe some people who heard that could have responded to this, and that led to whatever happened to Asha. One of those people could have been Donald Ferguson, who lived about 40 miles from Asha and has been linked by DNA to a 1990 rape and murder of a 7-year-old. But once again, sort of the same situation. The police up to this point have not been able to link him to Asha's disappearance.
And, note, based on the radio call out, that trucker actually thought that Asha was a woman, not a child. And the people that we've described here are seeking to prey on young girls, not just children, but like very young girls, prepubescent girls. And so they may not know from that radio call that this is their prey. And, those are two different types of criminals, I will say. Not everyone who's going to look for a vulnerable woman to rape will also want to do that to a child. So if they were to come and respond to that call thinking they'd find a woman and instead find a 7-year-old girl or a 9-year-old girl, let's just say that not all crimes are the same. And so just because they hear that call, they may not be child rapists. But I think you make a really good point that there are people around the area, and this is when you have no suspects, you have to look around and see if maybe there are other crimes that can help point to yours. And so there's nothing as you've said, Brett, that link these three men to Aisha, except that other girls were victims of their crimes, and we have no idea what happened to Aisha. Another theory is, remember, this is right before Valentine's Day, and it's also coincides with her parents' anniversary. One theory is that someone who knew Aisha and her family manipulated Aisha into believing that he would help her buy an anniversary or Valentine's Day present for her parents. This is similar to the Amy Mihaljevic kidnapping that James Renner wrote about in one of his just excellent true crime books. But again, that would involve her having communications with someone that nobody knows about. And why would she trust this person? And why would she go shopping in the middle of the night and bring clothes to go shopping? Multiple days worth of clothes for shopping. She would have to know that that would be the worst present for her parents, to wake up on their anniversary day and have a missing child.
Yeah, I think the clothes kind of defeat this theory. I mean, it's a good theory because you could imagine they go to church on Sunday, and you could imagine if there was somebody. Just imagine there's somebody in their church who is praying on her, and they say to her, have you bought anything for your parents yet for the anniversary? And she says no, and they're like, I can't believe that. I thought you would be better than that. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll help you out. I can't, I'm not available. I can work this afternoon, but meet me at 3:30 in the morning on the road, and we'll go get something, right? I mean, you could imagine that, and it would explain a lot of things, but it does not explain the clothes in the backpack. The clothes in the backpack make it seem like she was going somewhere, and she was going somewhere for a while. I mean, I like the theory. It's an interesting theory. It makes use of the fact that this happened on Valentine's Day and the anniversary. Kind of seems like those dates are unrelated to this. And I say that one thing that's strange about this, though, it is weird that she would do this on her parents' anniversary. So even if she thought she was going off to spend a couple days with her friend or to go on an adventure or whatever, it is strange that she would, of all times, decide to do that on her parents' anniversary.
But Brett, as a kid, did you know when your parents' anniversary was? This is an honest question. I don't think I knew the day of my parents' anniversary, and that might just be a commentary on my family dynamic, and maybe I wasn't a very good child, but I generally knew it was in September, but I didn't know the day of it.
I knew the day, but it wasn't important to me. Like I knew the day because it's very close to my birthday. So I knew the day, and I knew, for instance, my due date was their anniversary, and I was born early. So I knew that, right? If it hadn't been for that, would I necessarily know it? I don't know. Was it an important day to me? It was not. It wasn't something that I, as a child, celebrated or thought much of, probably because I was a selfish little kid. But
I think that's
so
important that you said right there, is that even though you knew it, it wasn't important for you. And that doesn't mean you're selfish. I think all children are egocentric. Like, what does it mean for me? You're not the one getting to go out for a fancy dinner with your parents. They probably celebrated themselves, right? Without you.
Right. That's a good point. So maybe it never crossed her mind. Valentine's Day wasn't important to her. She wasn't really, they weren't trading cards with people. It wasn't an important day for her. And the anniversary thing was just something she didn't think about. That's certainly possible. So I think our last theory that we're going to talk about today is that this is an example of pre-internet grooming. We think of grooming as something that is done online, sort of, to catch a predator type stuff that you see a lot, but there were child predators out there before the internet came along. And it is possible, and we talked about this sort of throughout this story, that someone lured Aisha out of her home, possibly, maybe even probably, with the picture of the girl, using that as bait. It's possible that they were communicating over the computer at school. It's 2000. I'm sure Aisha's school had computers. I know, I'd already graduated from high school by this point, but I remember in high school, we had computers that were connected to the internet in high school. So it wouldn't surprise me if Aisha had a computer at high school, and it wouldn't at her school, and it wouldn't surprise me if she was using that. So maybe she even met this person on there. I mean, I've wondered if this is like a pen pal situation where, she was writing letters back and forth with somebody that she believed to be this girl, and at some point the girl sends her photo. Kind of like Alice was saying, like you trade photos with your friends, and they were going to meet that night, but it wasn't the girl, it was someone else. It was someone pretending to be her. Or maybe even, it said, my dad will pick you up, so she wouldn't be scared and she wouldn't be concerned. And maybe that's the person in that car, if we believe the sighting that came out all those years later, the green car. Maybe that was the person who was supposed to be her dad. I mean, I don't know. No theory works really well in this case. This is one of those cases. We've talked about these cases before where there's just no theory that really you walk away satisfied with. And that's kind of, as we sort of wrap things up here, that's kind of where I'm at. We talked about all these things and none of them satisfy me.
Yeah, I mean, because with the sending of the picture, I had to get to her physically, and if it were someone who handed it to her, it probably was someone at school, but no one, has come forward that they did that. So it was probably mailed to her, but mailed to her where? At her home? And I can't imagine that, it'd be so risky as to have her parents potentially open it. I never got any mail that my parents didn't know about, certainly not at that age, because I never got mail. So if something were addressed to me, they would say, what's that? What are you doing? And I remember as a kid, this was, in the 90s, we did what is now chain letters, with all those email forwards, but we did them by physical mail. It'd be like, send a sticker book to 5 people listed on this page, and then send it to 20 more friends, and then you'll get sticker books, something like that. I would get those. That's basically the only handwritten mail. But I remember my mom would always say, what did you get there? And watch me open it up, because I didn't know back then that there were predators, but she knew. And so I didn't open mail by myself, certainly if it was not hand addressed to me.
And, we did something. There's a great book, those of you guys who like horror novels. There's a great horror novel called Pen Pal. If you haven't read it, check it out. It's really creepy, and it's about something that we used to do, and I can't believe we did it back in the 80s and 90s. We would do this thing where, and I don't know, Alice, if y'all ever did this. Now I don't think you can do this because it's not environmentally friendly, but we released balloons, and we would attach to the balloon a letter with our name, where we went to school, our address, and a photograph. And you would release the balloon, and the idea was that whoever found the balloon was supposed to write you a letter back. And, I don't know that anybody ever got a letter. And whoever got a letter from the person who was the farthest away, won, right? Your balloon made it the farthest, and so you won. And that's something we used to do, and now thinking about that seems like such a good way to have some predator identify you and stalk you. But yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. It's hard to imagine that her parents would not monitor what she was getting in the mail. They were pretty conscientious parents. They were paying attention. Now, look, they're latchkey kids, so it is possible that she could get home. She gets home before her parents, check the mail, get some letter from whoever, and just hide it and never let her parents know that she had received anything in the mail. That is a possibility. Like you said, very risky proposition for whoever did this, though she got that photograph from somewhere. I mean, she got it from somewhere. We don't know where. It obviously was important enough for her to carry with her on this night and to have out when she's waiting in that shed, either seeking shelter or waiting on someone. So she got it from somewhere. I don't know where, but it seems possible at least that she could have got it from someone who was posing as that girl.
Yeah, so those are the most common theories that are circulating out there, but like you said, Brett, none of them really satisfy me. So I guess there's nothing left to do but talk about what we think happened.
Well, I don't know what happened. The thing that's crazy about this case, and I'm really looking forward to people's thoughts. Sometimes this might be one of those where somebody's going to write in and there's a really obvious answer that we've just completely not thought about. But what seems clear to me is this was very intentional on her part. She had a plan. This was the day this was happening. It seems as though she almost had an appointment, and she was going to make that appointment come hell or high water, come rain, storms, winds. She was going to be there where she needed to be that very early morning. I don't know why she left her home that day, and I don't know where she was going. I tend to think, I'll say this, I don't think this was a random act. I don't think that she had headed off for some reason and a predator found her either by chance or by hearing that CB call and showing up thinking they're going to find a woman and actually finding a girl. I don't think that happened. I think she left that night because she had an appointment with a person who killed her. And she didn't know that at the time, but she was going to meet that person, and that person is the person who's responsible for her death.
Yeah, Brett. I mean, I think she left of her own volition. What I don't have answers for is why she left, but I think it had to be that day that she had an appointment, whether it was to go to an event, like maybe she was supposed to go to I don't know how she was going to walk to any sort of event, like a fair or whatnot, because there was no such event in town. But I think she had to leave February 13th or the morning of February 14th, and she thought someone was waiting for her. And I thought she was planning to be gone for a couple of days. I don't think she was running away, but I can't explain how she planned to leave for a couple of days knowing that would be very worrisome for her family, but she still planned to do that. Maybe she thought she could explain it away later. Maybe this was supposed to be a long-lost twin, a long-lost sister, someone writing her saying, I was given up at birth and I found out that you're my real sister. And maybe she thinks she's doing something good for her family. Maybe she thinks she's bringing back, someone like a long lost sister. We've talked about how this girl looks like her. Maybe she somehow thinks that this is a magnanimous thing to do, that she needs to be the one to bring back this lost sister, and it will be a present for her parents on their anniversary or Valentine's Day. I don't know. But I don't think she left with a bunch of ill will. I think that would have come out from community or her brother whom she shared a room with, or her parents or her family members, the cousin that she spent the night with. But I think when she left, she thought it was for a good thing. She had Tweety Bird purses and Tweety Bird shirts. This is an innocent child. I don't think she was trying to inflict pain and suffering on her family, nor did she think she was walking into a trap. And unfortunately, I think you're right, Brett, that she certainly met with ill will. And I think someone knew she was going to be there because this is a rural area. It was storming. It was 4:30 in the morning. I don't think predators are just trolling in bad weather. They're in economics. We have the ice cream theory. When ice cream sales go up, crime goes up. It's not because ice cream causes people to commit crimes. It's because ice cream sales are correlated with good weather. And so when ice cream sales go up, the weather is good. And so more people are out. And when more people are out, there are more instances for crime because you're trolling the streets. You see opportunity for crime. That's a very common economic theory of correlation. And so here it's the opposite. The weather is terrible. There is no, I don't think criminals typically are trolling rural areas where almost no one is ever, on the off chance that a 9-year-old girl leaves her house in the middle of the night, truly the middle of the night in stormy weather. So I think this person knew she was there.
Yeah, if you didn't have to be out that night, you weren't going to be out. Right. It's just, it seems impossible to believe that this was a lucky encounter. Doesn't mean it wasn't, and maybe we'll find out it was, but I think you're right. I think this was planned. We can hope that this Marcus Mellon guy actually knows something. He's not just blowing smoke, because this is when it's going to take somebody talking. Unless somebody does know something, this may be one that, unfortunately, we never solve.
And Brett, here's another reason I think that the person knew and planned this, whoever I think it was a murderer who did this, is because I think this person sent her going south, knowing that there may be sightings of her, that maybe she'll leave things behind, that if you were to track her or try to follow her for her trail, it would take you south, knowing that ultimately the person would pick her up and take Asha north. So I think
that's a good point.
That itself, I think it shows planning on someone's behalf.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Well, guys, that's what we've got for you on this one. I know, we always wish we could just solve them, but this is a tough one. Hoping you guys have some thoughts, some theories, some information would be great if you're somebody who has information. If you do have information about this case, we would urge you to contact authorities, contact the tip line in this case. There are 2 different numbers. I'll give you them both. The first one is 704-484-4788. The second one is 704-672-6100. If you know anything about this case, reach out to those numbers, contact the FBI. Any information you have that could be valuable in this case, I hope you will share it. Reach out to us if you have thoughts, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, prosecutorspodcast.com. We're at prosecutorspod on Instagram and Twitter. You can also find us on Reddit. You can find us on Patreon. You can find us anywhere. We're everywhere these days. Just want to give another shout out to Jay Tiger Tail for all her good work on the timeline in this case. Also put together a good interactive map that we have linked to on our website. So if you want to sort of orient yourself to the different locations in this case, check that out as well. Well, Alice, I think that's all we've got for today. Do you have anything else you want to add?
That's it. I just really hope that someone out there who remembers something, calls in a tip that can bring closure to the family.
Absolutely. I do too. If, there's somebody out there who knows something about this, and I hope if you do know something, even if it's, we said this in Delphi, even if you're not sure or you think it's nothing, it never hurts to call it in. So I hope you guys will do that. Next week, we'll be back with a new case. It is actually my favorite mystery. So this is my favorite case. I was working up our outline on it, and at some point I just had to stop because I just kept adding things, and we were going to be doing this case till the end of time, basically. So doing that next time is my favorite case. I can't wait to do it. Have no idea how many days we're going to be talking about this.
Guys, it's going to be long. It's going to be awesome. Brett bought me a book and sent it to me via Kindle. This is going to be good, guys. It's a book about the case.
It's going to be awesome. So I'm looking forward to talking about that one with you guys. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. I don't know why, but I feel like my microphone is never as loud as I want it to be.
Wait, you're always the one who sounds loud. I'm always the one who's quiet.
Well, that's because you are quiet.
I don't think so. I'm like at the red. I talk right up to it. Maybe,
what does your little blue stuff look like?
It looks big.
I don't know what to tell you.
I have to reset my closet. Let's be honest, it's not a room. My closet every time we record because, my baby comes in and sees the microphone is like, I will eat this, and there's slobber all over it, and I have to reinstall it every time.
natural podcaster.
I think he knows what it's for. He like screeches at the top of his lungs. He's usually naked because, let's be honest, it's really cute to be naked as a baby. And then he grabs a microphone and then he just like French kisses it.
Oh.
It's very cute. It's very cute. But it's very annoying because it takes me like 15 minutes to reset up every time.
Are you looking for a new job or want a career change? Look no further than Monster.com. Need a little help standing out? Our expert resume writing services will make sure you shine. Want to brush up on your interview skills? Engage with our AI interview prep tool. Want some advice on negotiating your new salary? Visit our salary tools and extensive library of career advice articles, and you'll have all the tips and tricks you'll need to succeed. Visit Monster.com today and take the first step towards your career. Monster.com. Find your right job fit.
If you're looking to streamline your audio advertising buys and maximize your revenue, look no further than Triton Digital's programmatic audio advertising exchange, A2X. The private exchange consists of only licensed broadcasters and top-tier internet radio publishers, assuring the quality inventory and brand safety you can trust. Visit www.tritondigital.com to learn more.